August 10th, 1943. If General George Smith Patton had walked past one hospital tent in Sicily without stepping inside, his career might have ended very differently. He would still have been feared, still have been respected, still have been the hard-driving commander of the 7th Army, but he would not have become the most controversial general in the United States Army. He would not have forced Dwight David Eisenhower into the most painful decision of his wartime command, and he would not have come within inches of being buried politically before he ever reached France. Because inside that tent sat one exhausted American soldier, shaking, feverish, broken by combat, and what Patton did to that man would ignite a scandal so explosive that Washington considered destroying him. This is what happened next. They called him Old Blood and Guts, General George Smith Patton, the man with the pearl-handled pistols, the man who believed speed was everything, the man who thought hesitation killed more soldiers than bullets. By the summer of 1943, Patton had already made a reputation in North Africa as the toughest commander in the American Army. He demanded polished helmets, clean uniforms, instant obedience. He cursed like artillery fire and expected his officers to move like racing engines. To Patton, war was not survived by caution. It was won by aggression, by momentum, by terrifying the enemy before the enemy could recover. That philosophy had made him famous. It had also made him dangerous. Sicily was supposed to prove that America had finally found its great battlefield commander, Operation Husky, the invasion of Sicily, the Allied assault that would open the Mediterranean and begin the destruction of Mussolini's empire. Patton's 7th Army landed on the southern coast of the island in July 1943 beside Bernard Montgomery's British 8th Army. Officially, Patton was supporting Montgomery. Officially, the British main effort would drive toward Messina while the Americans protected the flank. But George Smith Patton did not come to Sicily to play bodyguard to a British field marshal. Old Blood and Guts came to win. And win he did. His troops pushed through dust, heat, rock, and German resistance. They captured Palermo in a lightning drive that stunned friend and foe alike. Then Patton turned east, racing Montgomery for Messina in one of the most personal competitions of the war. Every mile became a test of ego. Every village captured was a message. George Smith Patton wanted to show the Allies, the Germans, the press, and most of all himself, that he was the best field commander in the Mediterranean. He wanted glory. He wanted speed. He wanted total offensive spirit from every man under his command. But Sicily was not just movement and victory. It was also heat stroke, malaria, dysentery, shell shock, combat fatigue, men who had marched under fire for weeks, men who had watched friends die in olive groves and mountain passes, men whose nerves had simply given out. In 1943, the Army still struggled to understand psychological collapse in combat. Today, it would be called trauma, battle exhaustion, PTSD. Back then, too many officers called it cowardice. George Smith Patton was one of them. August 3rd, 1943, near Nicosia, Sicily. Patton entered an evacuation hospital to visit wounded soldiers. It was the sort of thing commanders often did. Shake hands, boost morale. Show the men that the generals remembered them. Patton moved through the tents, talking to patients, asking about their wounds, praising their service. Then he stopped at the cot of a private named Charles H. Cool did not look wounded. No bandages, no obvious broken bones, no dramatic chest wound or missing limb. He looked pale, trembling, drained. Patton stared at him. "What's the matter with you, soldier?" Cool answered honestly. He said he guessed he just couldn't take it anymore. He said his nerves were shot. To a modern ear, that sounds like a man admitting total mental collapse under combat strain. To George Smith Patton, it sounded like surrender. Patton exploded. He called the soldier a coward, called him yellow. He accused him of being too afraid to fight while other men were bleeding on the line. Then, in front of doctors, nurses, and patients, General George Smith Patton slapped Private Cool across the face with his gloves. He ordered him out of the hospital, ordered him back to the front, ordered the staff not to admit that kind of man among the truly wounded. The tent went silent. Doctors were stunned. Nurses were horrified. Patients watched in disbelief as one of America's top generals physically assaulted a soldier suffering from combat trauma. But Patton left the tent believing he had done the right thing, believing he had enforced discipline, believing he had taught weakness a lesson. That was the terrifying thing. Old Blood and Guts was not out of control in his own mind. He thought he was being a leader. The incident might still have died there, buried inside one field hospital, written off as one ugly moment in a brutal campaign. But George Smith Patton had not learned anything from it. He had not paused, had not regretted it, had not questioned whether he had crossed a line. Instead, he doubled down. August 10th, 1943. Just 1 week later, another hospital, another patient, another catastrophe. This time, the soldier was Private Paul G. Bennett. Like Cool, Bennett was suffering from battle fatigue. Like Cool, he had no visible wounds. Like Cool, he represented everything Patton despised in war. A fighting man whose body was intact but whose mind could no longer carry the load. Patton asked what was wrong with him. Bennett answered that it was his nerves, that he had reached the end. Patton erupted again. He shouted at him, called him a coward, told him he was a disgrace to the army and his family. Then Patton struck him, hard. Witnesses said he slapped him and may have shoved him so violently that the soldier nearly fell from the tent. Then Patton pulled his pistol, waved it in rage, and threatened to shoot any man who showed such cowardice. Doctors stepped in. Staff members froze. A hospital commander later said the scene felt less like discipline and more like madness. This time, the story did not stay inside the tent. The doctors who witnessed the assault were furious. They believed Patton had humiliated a sick man, interfered with medical judgment, and endangered discipline more than he had preserved it. One of them reported the matter through channels. The report moved upward, first to senior medical officers, then to higher command, then finally to Supreme Allied Commander Dwight David Eisenhower. Ike read the report and felt sick. Dwight Eisenhower knew George Smith Patton better than almost anyone alive. They had served together for decades. He knew Patton was brilliant, knew he was difficult, knew he had a volcanic temper and a taste for theatrical brutality. But this was different. This was not profanity, not boastfulness, not friction with the British. This was a senior American general physically assaulting hospitalized enlisted men, not for mutiny, not for desertion, for combat exhaustion. Eisenhower faced an impossible choice. On one side was discipline, public trust, and the moral authority of command. If a general could slap sick soldiers and get away with it, what did that say about the army? What did it say to the families of those men? What did it say to every infantryman fighting in Sicily? On the other side was George Smith Patton himself, the one commander in the American army who radiated offensive energy like a weapon, the man who could move faster, hit harder, and inspire fear more effectively than almost anyone else in uniform. Eisenhower knew another truth too. The Allies were going to invade France one day, and when that day came, they might desperately need a commander exactly like Patton. So Eisenhower did what political generals do when every option is bad. He delayed final judgment and looked for a way to punish without destroying. First, he confronted Patton privately. The letter Eisenhower sent was blistering. He called Patton's conduct inexcusable. He said if there was any truth to the accusations, Patton had committed an act so serious that his usefulness as a commander might be ended. Not reduced, ended. That was how close Old Blood and Guts came to ruin. One more wrong move and Dwight Eisenhower was prepared to bury him. George Smith Patton read the message and for perhaps the first time in Sicily understood how close he had come to disaster. Because this was not some irritated staff officer writing, this was Ike. Calm, controlled, politically lethal Ike. The man who almost never lost his temper. And even in writing, you could feel the anger. Patton knew what it meant. If Eisenhower lost faith in him, everything was over. Patton wrote back. Defended himself at first. Suggested the incidents were exaggerated. Claimed he was trying to restore discipline. Claimed battle fatigue was too often used as an excuse. But Dwight Eisenhower was unmoved. He ordered Patton to apologize, not privately, personally, to the soldiers, to the doctors, to the hospital staffs who had witnessed the assaults. For George Smith Patton, that order was agony. He could lead tanks into gunfire. He could stare down German counterattacks. He could outdrive every general in the theater. But now he had to do something he hated more than defeat. He had to humble himself. Publicly, before subordinates. He obeyed. Patton went to the hospitals. He stood before medical staffs and admitted he had been wrong. He apologized to the men. He apologized to the doctors. Witnesses said the words came out painfully, like glass being chewed. This was not natural to him. Patton believed in domination, not contrition, but he did it because Eisenhower had left him no choice. That should have ended it. It didn't. Because in war, nothing stays buried forever, especially not when reporters are nearby and reputations are enormous. Word of the slapping incidents began to spread among correspondents in the Mediterranean. Most held the story for a time because the Sicilian campaign was still underway and because there was reluctance to damage a famous commander in wartime. But stories like that do not vanish. They ferment. They gather witnesses. They become more dangerous the longer they are contained. When the story finally reached American newspapers months later, the reaction was explosive. Families were outraged. Members of Congress demanded answers. Editorial writers asked how an American general could strike hospitalized soldiers and remain in command. To much of the public, the issue was simple. George Smith Patton had not slapped cowardice. He had slapped American boys who had already given everything they had. Washington began to tremble. The War Department understood the danger immediately. The United States needed heroes, needed confidence, needed generals people could trust. And now, one of its most famous commanders looked less like a warrior and more like a bully. There were whispers about relief, about permanent sidelining, about whether Patton had become too unstable, too politically toxic, too reckless to be trusted with major command again. Eisenhower once again stood in the middle. He could not openly defend Patton's conduct. He didn't want to. He thought it was shameful. But he also understood the larger military picture in a way newspaper editors did not. The war in Europe was entering its decisive phase. The Allies would eventually need to break out from the beaches, race across France, and crack the German army open. When that moment came, who did Eisenhower trust to unleash violence without hesitation? Who could turn a battlefield opportunity into a collapse of enemy resistance? Who could make Germans feel hunted? George Smith Patton. So Eisenhower crafted a punishment that was severe but not fatal. Patton would not receive the high-profile combat command he expected in the immediate aftermath of Sicily. His name would not be attached to the first wave of glory in Northwest Europe. He would be made to wait, to cool, to suffer, to understand that even brilliance had limits. But he would not be discarded. For Patton, the waiting was torture. Other men moved. Other generals advanced. The invasion plans for France developed without him at center stage. Old blood and guts feared the worst, that the slapping scandal had not merely embarrassed him, but permanently disqualified him from history's main stage. He had spent his life preparing for the Great War in Europe, the showdown with Germany, the armored campaign that would define him. And now, because of 2 moments of rage in hospital tents, it might all be gone. He brooded. He wrote bitterly. He blamed weakness. He blamed politics. He blamed a world that admired hard fighters in victory but recoiled from the hardness required to win. Yet beneath the bitterness was something more unsettling. Fear. George Smith Patton was afraid that he had sabotaged himself, afraid that his own temper had done what no German army had yet accomplished. Then came the strange twist that only war can produce. Instead of being erased, Patton was turned into a ghost weapon. In early 1944, as the Allies prepared for D-Day, German intelligence believed George Smith Patton was the Allies' most dangerous field commander. That belief was so widespread, so deeply embedded, that the Allies used it against the Germans. Patton was placed in command of the fictitious 1st U.S. Army Group in southeast England, a phantom force designed to convince Hitler that the main invasion would fall at Pas-de-Calais, not Normandy. Inflatable tanks, fake radio traffic, dummy camps, a whole deception operation built around one fact: the Germans feared Patton more than any other American general. Think about the irony. The man nearly destroyed for slapping sick soldiers became the centerpiece of the greatest military deception of the war. His reputation, the very thing that made him dangerous at home, made him invaluable abroad. Hitler's commanders saw Patton's name and assumed that wherever he was, the real blow would fall. But Patton was not made to command fake armies because Eisenhower trusted him politically. He was used because he was too valuable to lose and too radioactive to unleash too soon. That was the balance Ike struck. Keep him close, keep him useful, keep him contained until the moment absolutely demanded release. That moment came after Normandy. Once the beachhead was secure and the war required speed instead of caution, George Smith Patton returned to real command. 3rd Army, France. Then the old machine roared back to life. Breakout. Relentless advance. Rivers crossed. Towns taken. German formations shattered. The very qualities that had made him unbearable in peace and scandalous in Sicily made him devastating in mobile war. Old blood and guts was finally where he belonged, chasing, attacking, smashing, never letting the enemy breathe. And yet the stain never vanished. The slapping incidents followed him like a shadow for the rest of his life. Every victory reopened the question: was George Smith Patton a military genius burdened by an explosive temperament, or was he proof that brilliance can become cruelty when unchecked by humanity? His supporters said the army needed hard men to win hard wars. His critics said strength without restraint is just another form of weakness. Both sides had evidence. Because the ugly truth is this: Patton was both. He could inspire men to impossible feats. He could also wound them in ways no enemy had. He understood movement, attack, pressure, and fear better than almost any American commander of the war. But in those hospital tents in Sicily, he revealed something else: a blindness, an inability to recognize that some soldiers do not fail because they are cowards. They fail because war has already taken everything from them. Dwight Eisenhower understood that better than Patton did. That is why he almost ended his career. And maybe that is the real story. Not that George Smith Patton slapped 2 soldiers. Not that the press exploded. Not even that Eisenhower saved him. The real story is that the Allied war effort survived because one man knew how to win battles, and another knew when not to destroy the man who could win them. Patton was the sword. Eisenhower was the hand that kept that sword from being thrown away. If Eisenhower had relieved him permanently after Sicily, history would remember the decision as morally understandable and militarily disastrous. No Patton in France. No Patton racing across Europe. No Patton pivoting 3rd Army toward Bastogne in the snow and chaos of December 1944. No old blood and guts delivering the kind of violent operational shock that Germany feared most. But if Eisenhower had ignored the slapping incidents completely, he would have told every American soldier that fame protected abuse, that generals could humiliate the broken and call it discipline. So he chose the middle path. Punish. Delay. Preserve. It was not clean, it was not satisfying, it was command. George Smith Patton never fully forgave the humiliation. Dwight Eisenhower never fully forgot the embarrassment. Their partnership continued because the war demanded it. But something changed in Sicily. A line had been crossed. The Supreme Commander had seen how dangerous Patton could be when his virtues turned inward, when aggression stopped being aimed at the enemy and started being inflicted on his own men. That was why the scandal mattered. Not because it exposed that George Smith Patton was harsh. Everyone already knew that. It mattered because it exposed that even America's most feared general could lose sight of what war does to the human mind. It mattered because it proved that command is not just pressure and momentum and victory. It is judgment, restraint, the ability to know when a man has failed in duty and when a man has simply been destroyed by too much battle. In Sicily, Patton got that distinction wrong. 2 soldiers paid the price in humiliation. He nearly paid the price with his career. And Dwight Eisenhower, staring at reports from 2 hospital tents, came closer than ever to ending old blood and guts forever. But he didn't. Because history is rarely shaped by saints. More often, it is shaped by flawed men kept barely inside the line by other flawed men who understand their value. George Smith Patton went on to become a legend, but legends are dangerous when you strip away the polish. Underneath the speeches and pistols and battlefield brilliance was a man capable of greatness and cruelty in the same breath. That is why the two slaps in Sicily still matter, because they remind us that war does not only test courage, it tests character. And sometimes even the men who look strongest